Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Ways and Means budget hearing. It being Monday, May 15th at 5 p.m. We will begin this evening's hearings, and as we normally do, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And if you could just remain standing for a moment as we pause in remembrance of all of those who have served our country home and abroad, and for those who have given the ultimate sacrifice for our liberties. Thank you. Please have a seat. Okay, so first piece of business, if we could have a roll call, please. Clerk Semino.
Councillor Reynolds.
Here.
Councillor Flaherty.
Here.
Councillor Maglia.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. No approval of minutes this evening, and nor do we have any old business to cover. So first up will be for us to hear a motion. Well, actually, I stand corrected. First new business we have for this evening is, we actually do have new business. That's a correction on my part. Motion 23032, Town Clerk, Votes Act of 2022, early vote by mail, opt-out provision, or take up any action relative thereto. And with us is our town clerk, Jim Casey. So, Clerk Casey, if you could give us, please, a quick overview.
Thank you. Thank you for having me this evening, and I apologize for my casual dress. I was doing some working from home today, and I ran up here quickly. The two items I have this evening are both initiated through the Votes Act of 2022. The first one is relative to voter registration. As part of the Voter Registration Act, typically voter registration was 20 days prior to Election Day, which always made it a Wednesday, and we would be open all day and until 8 p.m. for those last-minute voter registrations to come in. Through the wisdoms of our legislators, they changed it to 10 days. And if you do your simple math, a 10-day from Election Day, Tuesday Election Day always falls on a Saturday. And they require us to be present here on a Saturday from 9 a.m. or 8:30 a.m. until 5 in the afternoon. And election time is very difficult on the staff with a lot of days that we have to work. And there is some legislation, Mass General Law, that allows us to move that to a Friday. Fortunately, back in 1951, March of 51, the town adopted this Mass General Law. It's Mass General Law, Section 41, Mass General Law 41, Section 110A.
If I could just ask for a point of clarification. Is what you're describing, is this part of motion 23033?
Am I doing the right one, too? Yeah, this is office hours on Saturday.
Oh, okay, just for a correction, we are now talking about motion 23033, which is Town Clerk Votes Act of 2022, Voter Registration, Mass General Law, Section 110A, office hours on Saturday, or take up any action relative thereto. Thank you.
Correct. Okay, so essentially with this act allows any work on a Saturday, when it's possible, it can be moved to the Friday to complete. And if you take a look at the chart I put on the last page of your handout, you'll see that on voter registration, it shows you the different methods that we have. We have paper applications, online application, and automatic voter registration. We're concerned with the paper applications here. And then when we filter down into the paper, you have in-person, which would be within the clerk's office, and then anything in U.S. mail. So what we're looking at, even though I spoke with our town solicitor, and she says, I really do not need to come before the council. However, where this was passed in 1951, and it was a surprise to me that it was passed back in that day, I thought it was best for me to come before the council to see if they want to accept this, that we're asking that the voter registration be moved to Friday till 5 o'clock. We'll still meet the time frame. Where it comes before the Ways and Means Committee, because if we work on Saturday, we're looking at about $1,000 in overtime costs for 2 employees to be here at Town Hall. If we move it to the Friday at 5 o'clock, we worked until 1 o'clock, so it's picking up an additional 4 hours of overtime, so we're going to whittle that down to a little less than half of that cost. I see it as cost savings. Voters will not be disenfranchised from registering to vote. If you take a look at that chart there, that voters will still have the opportunity to mail it in. They can go on the town website. They can go on the Secretariat website. Automatic voter registration is through the Registry of Motor Vehicles in the Unemployment Office. Well, they close on Friday. They're not open on Saturday to complete that. So we're going to be proposing that we be in line with that agency and still have the additional opportunities for people still to vote until 5 o'clock on Saturday. So I'm asking for the support of the committee to reaffirm the Vote Act of that was taken in March of 1951, which is Mass General Law, Section 110A.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Clerk Casey, for that. I'm going to ask the members of the committee for questions they may have on this particular motion 23033. So, Councilor Flaherty, any questions?
Historically in Braintree, how much activity have you seen for this voter registration kind of at the last minute? How much traffic do you anticipate?
Typically when it was on Wednesday night until 8 p.m., we generally saw 0 voter registrations being done. Once in a great while, we would have one individual show up. So it's not like it's going to be a massive way. Now it's on a Saturday, and there are still opportunities for the individual person eligible to vote to cast it, to submit the registration through other means. It's already contained on our website to explain to them how they can register to vote. And they've had until January 1st to do this process already.
Okay, and when I think about Saturdays and the likelihood of traffic in the office, I mean, for this purpose, to register for voting, do you anticipate that activity in and around Town Hall, like the farmers market, would generate traffic, or do you think that it would have no impact at all?
I do not think it'll have any impact at all. Because, again, we can place on the door if you want to register to vote, you can go online and do it, or you can just go to mail it in. As long as you get into the mailbox by 5 o'clock that evening, they can still vote.
By 5 o'clock on Saturday evening?
On Saturday evening, yes.
Okay. So it wouldn't eliminate their ability to register, it would only eliminate their ability to register in person and only on that one day?
Just on that one day, though we will compensate that by opening until 5 o'clock on Friday. So we're picking up 4 additional hours of registration time on the Friday.
Okay. Well, I will be interested in hearing my colleagues' thoughts on that. I'll yield.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Maglio, questions or comments?
Yes. Thank you. So do you anticipate this ever changing again in the future?
Oh, I think we're going to have same-day voter registration. I wouldn't be surprised it's not coming up next year.
Okay, so the 10 days before, because what I'm wondering is, in order for it to stick in people's minds, the fact that the deadline changes, everybody always thinks, oh, I have time. This actually extends the deadline, it being 10 days before rather than 20, so it actually is giving people more time, right?
That it does.
Yes. So do you anticipate this changing in Braintree again, in the absence of some other federal changes?
This is controlled by the Secretary of State's office.
Mm-hmm.
The Secretary of State's office is the one who advised local municipalities of this Mass General Law. As I was doing some research for some other Mass General Law, this one hit me in the eye because I was coming before you to adopt this Mass General Law, and we already adopted it back in 1951.
Okay.
And so,
well, I'm definitely in favor of anything that gives people more time to register to vote. I'm also in favor of having a clear process that people can follow that is consistent from year to year, unless there are changes through the Secretary of State's office or federal law. So I don't really have any other questions. That's it.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. So, I think I understand this clearly. The bottom line is this: whether or not somebody was here in person to allow voters to come in and register to vote in this building physically until 5 p.m. on Saturday, we still have that ability for any voter to register to vote by 5 p.m. on Saturday, but it's either mail or online.
That is correct.
Thank you. I understand that clearly. In person, we'll have that opportunity until 5 p.m. on Friday. Your point being that normally we close shop here at 1 o'clock.
That's correct.
Order of business, so you will be available. The doors will be open for an additional 4 hours. I don't have any problems. So, do we have a motion on 23033?
Motion for favorable recommendation to the full council.
Second.
Well, wait, I have to,
Well, do you have to
read
read
the
that
motion.
proposed motion?
because
Okay.
we have to do this twice.
Yes,
Once
you do.
for the September election and once for the November?
Correct.
Okay.
That is
So,
correct.
motion for favorable recommendation to the full council, pursuant to the Votes Act of 2022, the Braintree Town Council will not exercise the opt-out provision for early voting. Sorry. I apologize.
That's all.
23, yeah.
Okay, motion for favorable recommendation to the full council pursuant with Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 41, Section 110A, to authorize the town clerk's office to remain closed on all Saturdays and to treat Saturdays as a legal holiday for purposes of calculating the time frame for filing matters in that office for the September 19th, 2023 local preliminary election, or take any other action relative thereto.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That is unanimous. Thank you.
Motion for favorable do I continue?
Let-
Yeah,
Yes.
with the second motion now? Right. So motion for favorable recommendation to the full council pursuant with Mass General Law, Chapter 41, Section 110A, to authorize the town clerk's office to remain closed on all Saturdays and to treat Saturdays as a legal holiday for purposes of calculating the time frame for filing matters in that office for the November 7th, 2023 local general election, or take any other action relative thereto.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That is unanimous. Thank
you. I appreciate your support.
All right, now back to motion 23032, Town Clerk Votes Act of 2022, early vote by mail opt-out provision or take up any action relative thereto. Okay, if you could also just give us a brief on that, Clerk Casey?
Okay, as you may recall, during my budget hearing for my budget, I talked about early voting in person, which is what we're going to refer to chart number 1. This is opting out for early voting. However, the way the Vote Act of 2022 set this up is the initiator of whether they want to opt into early voting in person comes from the Board of Registers. The Board of Registers met on March 28 of this year. They discussed it and they unanimously voted that we will not have early voting in person for both the September 19th election nor the September 17th, 19th and November 7th elections. Voters will, in the next one I talk about, voters will have the option to early vote by mail. That's an automatic. And there are other options that people can vote early for both the September and November election. So right now for the first one, the early voting in person, it's not before this committee. I'm just providing it as informational. And the chart kind of gives you a flow chart of the process. So if we go into the early vote by mail, which is chart 2, early vote by mail is now required for all elections, and including special elections and primaries, with a provision for the town council to opt out of early voting by mail for local election by a vote to be taken at least 45 days prior to the election. As the administrator of elections for the town, doing this at the last minute at 45 days makes no sense. It puts the elections in jeopardy. This is one of the reasons why I'm bringing it forward at this particular time. I want to find out what is the will of the town council. If they want to take the opt-out option, I need to do that. I can process that flow. Or if they continue with it, then I know how to process for the elections coming up. So it says municipalities are not required to send a vote by mail application to voters for local elections, except with new voter registrations acknowledgement notices. We have been doing this since January 1st, sending these vote by mail applications to all the voter new registrations. I just want to let you know is any time a person goes into the registry of motor vehicle or to the unemployment office, they are automatically re-registered to vote. Okay, so just for a simple math exercise here, we have 28,000 registered voters. Your driver's license is what, every 4 years, so we will get a quarter of people coming in on the renewing the driver's license. So essentially 7,000 people registering for this year. We have to go through those voters, every single one, to verify what has happened. We're finding a lot of errors. People are getting duplicate voter registrations. Something that used to take us 5 minutes to do every morning is now taking us 4 hours because we have to do a deep dive and to find out what's happening with this person. Why are they in there 2 times? And then with that, we go through the process and we rectify those issues. If you are a brand new voter, that is, we've never had you on our voter list here in Braintree, we then will send that person with their acknowledgement a vote by mail application which they can fill out. As of, well, I wasn't in today, so as of Friday at 1 o'clock, we haven't had a single one. So we've been mailing them out for nearly 4.5 months, and nobody sent a vote by mail application in at this particular time.
Okay, so I think we get the gist of what it is that you need from us.
Okay, I will vote if the council, if you adopt, do not change the vote by mail. You opt out of it. There's a cost consequence with that, and which we have no problem with, because I think vote by mail is something that's going to be the thing of the future. We've already had it. It's gonna
Can I
get
just
bigger.
ask you for clarification? So, the default position is that would require a vote if we decide to opt out of
That,
vote by mail.
that's right.
And the default position for us to require a vote on the in-person is if we decide to opt in.
That's great. That's,
All right? Vote in person, the default is to opt in, so we would
No.
need to
To
opt
opt
out. Opt out. The default, so there is no vote required if this committee decides it wants to go along with your recommendation of no in-person voting for early voting.
no, I'm not making a recommendation against it. I want this committee to vote, are they in favor to leave it as alone and have vote by mail? Or do you want to look at the financials on this and exercise the vote out?
Right, we get that. So essentially,
Yeah,
what we're going to do here, and this is my position, is that, I'm not representing my fellow committee members, is that I do want an early voter provision for our voters in Braintree. Right now, what seems to be the most practical or economical way to do that is to allow early voting by mail.
that is correct.
Right?
That's correct.
Okay, terrific. So I'm going to ask Councilor Flaherty, any questions?
I want to be clear on what it is, and I'm not yet clear. What we are being asked to evaluate is whether we should opt out of early voting by mail, because if we opt out of it, it's a cost savings for the town, but then early voting by mail is a mechanism by which people are increasingly voting. Is that correct?
That is correct. If you take a look at the motion, the motion is pursuant to the Votes Act of 2022, the Braintree Council will not exercise the opt-out provision for early voting in person. So that is telling the voters in Braintree that there will be early voting by mail. Okay?
Got it.
Now, by not exercising that opt-out provision, there are cost consequences. I believe, Council Flaherty, you asked me several months back about mailing out the postcards and what the cost estimate of that, which I did get a cost estimate. Let's assume we have a September election and the November election. To mail out a postcard to every registered voter, it's about $1 a postcard. So we're looking at $28,000 expense. Now, assume that we got 3,000 postcards back that they want to vote early by mail. For the November election, I have to mail out to those 25,000 who didn't send a postcard again. So we're looking at the cost of over $50,000. And we don't have to go that route. If you follow the chart, I say we can do it by another avenue of just advertising that we're going to be doing it. We can use the Braintree Advertiser or maybe the Bell insert that, hey, if you want to vote by mail early, go to this website and you can pull down an application. We need to promote it in some way. I think doing it by postcard, it's too expensive because I'm looking at, it's a local election. The local elections tend to be very soft in voter turnout. It's going to be cost prohibitive. And I go through my chart, you'll see that the little triangles kind of give you a pathway of what things that we have to do and how to get to the end. It's a very challenging administrative task. We've done it before. The postcards were always done by the state. They pay for the postcard. They will be sending out a postcard in December for the March election. So people, when we have the March presidential election, the state will be paying the cost of that. But for local elections, it's on our dime. And there's 56,000 worth of dimes that we're going to have to come up with.
Okay. And in the budget that we reviewed, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember that you included these costs in your projected budget.
I did not include the $56,000 into that budget. I thought, my budget is 24% above a year ago, and if I added another $56,000, I would be in the neighborhood of 40%. And I did budget, though, for doing some advertising, which I think is most effective.
Okay.
And one thing, too, is in looking at this, my background, I was in sales and marketing, and I was involved in advertising, research, and things of that nature, so I know avenues how we can reach out to the voters, to remind them of elections coming up and the voter turnout. Mailing a postcard, really not going to drive in that many new voter turnout. We saw that a year ago last September when we had a horrible September primary turnout. And that's where the state paid for postcards to every single registered voter. And again, less than half of those that we mailed out a ballot, they actually cast it. So it's a very expensive process. I'm trying to stay within a budget, a reasonable budget expense here.
I do. So you're saying, do you have a recommendation overall on this? Or
yeah, read my motion. The motion.
Okay, so your recommendation is the proposed motions as they're listed.
That is correct.
Okay.
That's my recommendation, is not to opt out. Is let us do it, but I want you to understand that I didn't budget to mail out postcards.
Okay.
So my avenue of doing that will be signage along the streets. The highway billboard will have that flashing, and then I will use the Braintree Advertiser and/or the belt insert to reach out to voters, as well as on our website.
I certainly support voting by mail for residents who choose that option. So I will support this. I hope that they choose it. I think it makes it easier.
Yeah, I think it's a viable option, vote by mail. We have another option of that. It's called absentee early voting. You know, that's been going on since the beginning of time, essentially. And unfortunately, it's those people who, in the fall elections, go down to Florida, fill out those.
I don't have any further questions.
Thank you very much, Councilor. Councilor Maglio, questions or comments?
Thank you, yes. So I'd like to say that if we were to restate this motion, which we won't for the vote, but by it saying will not exercise opt-out, it could actually say will ensure early voting by mail is in place. That's essentially what we're saying.
Yes, but the vote is the vote before us from the Secretary of State's office is opting in or opting out, and that's the preferred language that we utilize.
I get that that's the language, but just in terms of being very clear and directive about it, and I'm not suggesting to change it, but just to understand it, that we will ensure early voting by mail takes place.
Yes.
That's basically what this motion
That is. Voters will have the option to early vote by mail.
Okay. Question about the advertising piece. I noticed that there were people at the rabies clinic this weekend who were checking where people heard about the rabies availability, the clinic. And I'm wondering, did that give you some interesting feedback as to what methods of communication get most people to act?
That was something that was done by the Braintree JCs. I was not aware of they were doing that until after the fact. But
well, they were doing that, so that might be good data to find out.
We registered 65 dogs in Braintree on that Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
I sent out 3,000 emails twice.
Oh, God.
And I got 65 people.
Wow. Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
You heard about it. You were there.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know about the I knew about the registration, but what I thought we were being asked for was the rabies part of the day.
Yeah, there was a rabies part, but we want you also to register your dog when you're in Braintree.
Which
Because that's
we
very
did.
important.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so I was just thinking that might be some interesting data in terms of how people in town hear about different things. And that's terrific. I will support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I don't have any further questions. So, is there a motion?
Motion for favorable recommendation to the full council pursuant to the Votes Act of 2022. The Braintree Town Council will not exercise the opt-out provision for early voting by mail for the September 19th, 2023 local preliminary election or take any other action relative thereto.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That is unanimous. And
Motion for favorable recommendation to the full council pursuant to the Votes Act of 2022. The Braintree Town Council will not exercise the opt-out provision for early voting by mail for the November 7th, 2023 local general election or take any other action relative thereto.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the support on both of these actions. I think they're very viable ways for residents to register to vote and also to have the opportunity to obtain a ballot. Unfortunately, I can't push them to cast it. They have to do that upon themselves, and we just hope they turn out a little better than the 20% turnout I'm expecting. Okay? Well, again, everybody have a good night.
Thank you. You as well. Okay. Next on our agenda, we have a motion to take off of the table motion 23025, Mayor, FY 2024 operating budget, or take up any action relative thereto.
Motion to take off the table order 23025.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That is unanimous. Terrific. Thank you. And welcome back, Chief of Staff LaForest.
Reynolds.
All right, and we have with you the Finance Director, Ed Spellman, and also the Council Town Auditor, Sean McGoldrick. So thank you all for being here this evening. So any opening statements that you would like to give, Chief of Staff?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what I would also like to acknowledge is with us is the Director of Community Affairs, Kate Naughton.
Oh, thank you. Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us, Kate.
Thank you. And I guess we want to review for you any changes. We did send down a budget narrative based on prior years. You will notice the fiscal year budget submission is decreased 8.41% from last year, and the mayor's budget takes less than 1/3% of our town FY24 budget. Major changes of note, I think you'll see the administrative clerical line had a decrease, the biggest decrease, as the prior chief of staff position also included a payment for the town solicitor, and so that, as we talked previously at a meeting, those duties have changed. The department head is the mayor himself. You see a reduction of that salary line of 0.4%, and that is really just because of the way the pay periods fall. No actual salary change, just the amount of calendar dates, pay dates. What you saw in our increases are for advertising, cell phone, postage, office supplies, and dues and memberships. It's a pretty lean budget here, and I'm glad to review that with you. As you know, on the increases, the advertising needed to happen town-wide, whether it's legal advertising or other, is looking to be increased by $830. That is a big percentage number if you look at it. It's 66.4%. And you can look back and see, prior 2 fiscal years ago, we were spending over $5,000. So that line, we're looking to start to restore the advertising line. Last year was level funded. but a 37.5% reduction from the prior fiscal year. So it's looking to get that somewhat climbing back to be restored. The cell phone bill, you'll see an increase of $715. We previously had 3 last year. I think Dan was on board only partial of the year, so this year you're funding it with 4 full positions. And as you know, the mayor's office is, all of us are working. The hours extend beyond the typical town hall day, so pretty imperative to have that for the team. Postage, I'm actually quite surprised how small of a line postage is, and glad to see a lot of communications coming out of the office. I guess whether it's the robocalls or digital media, but oftentimes snail mail is quite valuable and necessary, and so that's a $300 increase, and by percentage you'll see that's 150%. So for such a small number, it's going up from $200 to $500. The office supplies line again is, appears as a large number of increases, 46.7%, but it is a $700 increase for the year. And in addition, the final increase line is the dues and memberships. As you know, we pay the townwide memberships for the Mass Municipal Association of about $12,000, and the Metropolitan Area Planning Council is $15,000. We do have fees in for conferences and subscriptions, so we are looking to restore that. In previous years, conferences with COVID hadn't happened, but we are looking forward to that for this year. And that is our budget this year.
Thank you, Chief of Staff LaForest. We appreciate that. So, do we have any questions from Councilor Flaherty to open up?
My main question had to do with the subscriptions, and you explained that beautifully, so no questions from me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Maglio, questions or comments?
Yes, you've answered one of mine already, and then I'm just curious about the staffing, because I know there's now a Director of Community Affairs, and what about was that a promotion from the Services Coordinator position? Or is there someone else being hired?
Nope, so I think whether this was reorged before I arrived, these are the titles, no titles have since changed. So Kate Naughton is our Director of Community Affairs with us this evening. Whether the duties have changed, I think that Kate for sure is the go-to first one for everybody, but Ed, you want to talk about Cindy? Thank you. If I could ask our HR Director.
Yes, the chair recognizes Cindy Lupina.
That
The mic for
Thank you.
That specifically was title change. The position, the wages were already in the budget. It was more reflective of what she's actually doing. So it's title change.
So there isn't another staff position to fill?
No.
All right. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank
you.
That's it for me.
Thank you. I have to say thank you to the Chief of Staff for providing us with this, the Mayor's Office summary of where the changes are. I would say that, as you had said earlier, it's a pretty lean budget. It does appear that you're actually coming in lower than the budget was for last year. So in looking at this, I don't have any concerns. So unless there's anything further from the members of the committee, I would ask for a motion.
Well, there's nothing to vote on at present. We're just
sorry. Here I am in my motion. All right, so that actually will be all culminating when we actually do the entire budget. Thank you, Councilor Flaherty, for correcting me. All right, getting ahead of myself once again. So, well, actually, I stand corrected. I do want to have an opportunity, and I want to, for the record, Council President Baraka has joined us, and I'm not quite sure, Madam President, if you have any questions regarding the Mayor's budget.
Thank you, Chairman Reynolds. I'm all set for right now.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay. so we're good to go.
Great.
Chief of Staff LaForest, thank you for your time, and Ms. Naughton, thank you for your time as well, and Ms. DePina. Thanks. All right, on this matter. So, next up we have a 6 o'clock appointment for the fire department to review. It is now 5:45, and so unless we have any matters, I'd ask the clerk, is there any matters that you would like to take up? Anything where we have an open window of opportunity here?
Not unless we want to take a recess until someone shows up. We can-
Okay, okay. So that's it. We'll, yes, go ahead, Councilor Flaherty.
You had mentioned you maybe had some revenue questions. I would suggest that if you have revenue questions, now is an excellent time to pose those.
I'm sorry I don't have those with me this evening.
Okay.
So, but that was a good suggestion, and I'll make sure that I take them with me to the next meeting in case we do have the rare pause in our schedule for budget oversight. Okay, so we don't need a vote for the recess, do we?
Should.
Okay, so do we have a motion to take a 15-minute recess?
Motion to take a 15-minute recess?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. That's right. The source of funding that additional overtime. To fund the overtime. They're funding it through another mechanism that doesn't require our vote. It doesn't change the numbers, though. Right. So how do we get those numbers? We ask for them. Okay. And we need to know those numbers because it's important to us in our deliberations now as we move into fiscal '24. There is a direct follow-on impact. So there is no reason we should not, there is no reason why we can't have those numbers. Okay. Okay. All right.
So you were not available on the 18th. Somebody wasn't available.
The 18th is a what, a Thursday?
Yes, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
What do we want to do on the 18th?
I was just thinking if we were going to do the 12th, if we wanted the 23rd.
I couldn't take 4 nights in a row. I'm going to be honest with you.
Okay. So how about we do the 22nd, Monday the 22nd?
Yeah.
Get the stuff in for that night.
Yeah. And take on the finance follow-up question.
Right. Okay.
Wait, Monday the 22nd?
Yeah.
Is that not good for you?
It's not. I sent it updated email today. It's been rescheduled. Monday the 5th of June. It's still tentative?
I could have had mine, but I already canceled it.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's absolutely
All right.
bonkers. So supplemental to Ways and Means, Monday the 22nd.
Yes, Chairman Reynolds?
Yes.
And what time is the best start time for you?
11 at night.
You're a night owl.
Yeah, what time can you guys make it? Like, what time can you make it easily? Because that day I don't have any...
6 o'clock would be good for me, I'll be honest with you.
6 is good?
It's a better time.
Okay.
These 5 o'clock meetings have been rough for me.
Okay.
Getting
I'm going to
things done.
schedule a second meeting for that week, just because
In case it's
I
an emergency.
don't like to not have
I
another
like it.
meeting scheduled. Okay. Would you prefer the 23rd or the 24th?
Julia, any comments?
The 23rd is the town council meeting.
Well, the 23rd, the Master Plan Steering Committee, we are also going to cancel. That's just too much.
So we're not
Too much
having...
on the agenda.
So the
Too much
23rd is the full council meeting.
No,
That's the 30th.
the 30th.
Oh, I
was
do.
gonna be
I have it noted as master plan.
Right.
I apologize.
So we're going to cancel that and
We're gonna cancel that.
reschedule. Yeah. Because
All right.
3 meetings for next week as well as these.
Okay, so not that. So we're gonna do Ways and Means on that day instead?
I have no problem with that.
23rd?
23rd?
2 days in a row. Just do it.
Get it out of the way.
Pull the Band-Aid off. And start time. That's start time for the Tuesday the 23rd.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
And that one is for...
We will put stuff back on and revenue back on. And I actually...
Callback is Monday night, but we're going to use Tuesday night in case we don't get everything done on Monday night.
Yep, so basically Monday and Tuesday will be callback as well as supplemental. Chair Reynolds, I am also going to put on the establishment of the new revolving fund for tree replacement. It is a 2-sentence paragraph.
No problem.
And just get it off of...
Great. All right. Terrific.
So let's
Okay.
fire up.
Let's do it. So we have to vote to, or back, okay. Okay. Yeah? So we took the recess. Okay. That's fine. It's okay. All right, so we set the expectation with our vote. So we're ready to open back up after our 15-minute recess. Ready to go. You got it, friend. All right. No, you got it. Okay. So, no worries, Madam President. Okay, so we're just waiting for the go sign from Bill. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. So, we have completed the recess, so we'll have a motion to reopen the hearing. this evening's meeting. Do we have a motion?
Motion to reopen this evening's meeting?
Second?
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're back in business, and it being 6 o'clock, we have scheduled with us this evening the fire department to review that budget for fiscal 2024. So I would welcome the chief and Mary Ann. How are you? Good to see you. And
Good evening.
good evening, chief. Welcome. And would you like to start with any kind of an opening statement?
No, let's just get to it.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. So, what we'll do is we are going to review, we know we have a few different sections of the fire budget. We are going to just ask each of the counselors if they have a question that that will include anything across the various departments of your budget. Instead of the other evening, we took each section of the DPW one by one. This time, we think that we have the confidence level that we have the answers and an opportunity to discuss for clarity, just taking this as the group, one felt swoop of your budget. Each council will have the opportunity to ask a question, and then we'll move on to the next counselor. So that being said, I'm going to give the floor to Councilor Flaherty for any comments or questions she may have.
Thank you, and thank you, Chief, for coming out tonight. I appreciate your time. Most of my questions surround the concerns over overtime, and that's because our budget is very, very, very tight this year, and there's almost no item that is as difficult to predict as overtime, and it's also a lot of money. And of course, we're going to pay our firefighters. We're going to pay all of our people. But in my questions to you in advance of the meeting, I was asking questions around what we could do to reduce the amount of overtime. And I suggested, what about extra people? If we hired people, would the cost of their salaries, this is not precisely what I wrote to you, but it's kind of what I was getting at. If we hired additional firefighters, would the cost of their salaries be less than the cost of the overtime that we incur in the absence of the larger force that we would gain if we hired new people?
So, in my answer, I had mentioned the fact that if you were going to go by that scenario, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 firefighters, you would have to go with 4. We have 4 groups, and unless you add 1 firefighter to each group, there's no way to predict where the injured firefighters, which group they're going to end up. So if we were to hire 2, and I put them on groups 1 and 2, and then I had 2 injuries, which we actually had 2 more today. But if those injuries occurred on group 3 and 4, there's no cost savings there because I can't move anybody for 30 days per the contract. It's not like I can just, pull and plug different guys, girls into different spots in the snap of a finger. It's all contractual, and that's kind of what ties my hands, monetary.
Okay. So, do you usually do your hiring in groups of 4?
No, we hire, we have a 17-man minimum. So, right now, actually, on group 1, I dropped the manning to 16 because there's a clause in the contract which allows me to drop it to 16 if somebody is out 60 consecutive shifts in a row due to injury. And we have that right now. And, in order to save some money, that's what I did. So, we've been operating like that for probably 6 weeks, 7 weeks. As Mary Ann can tell you, we predict a savings of $300,000. Is it a little more than that? Yes. What was it exactly? About $360,000 year over year from this year to last. So the firefighters we did hire have made a difference. I know what you're saying. It's very, very hard to explain. We had so many people out between COVID, injuries, FMLA, intermittent FMLA, sick time. Again, we're a very senior-heavy department. So 90% of the department has at least 4 weeks vacation. A lot have 5 out of that 90%. So, you know, when you do the numbers and you look at the contractual manning clause, you know, it's very tough to manage, especially when you have injuries piled on top of everything else.
So in your response to me, you explained that the cost of 4 firefighters, so that you could assign 1 to each group, would be greater than the savings that you might get from those hires. But you identified a higher salary than their starting salary. I don't have it in front of me, or I would reference it.
Right.
But why did you identify the higher salary instead of the starting salary?
Well, because it only takes about 2 years to get to top step. So it goes from F1A to F1E are the steps. And within 2 years, I figured just to, it's not a whole lot of money, to be honest with you. I think it's from bottom to top, it's 14,000, something like that. So if there's 64,000 difference. So if you wanted to decrease that number by 64, you're gonna, every 6 months, you're gonna be bumping up again. So I think all in, health benefits and everything, it's between $100,000 and $108,000 per firefighter at top step.
Okay, so you see no solution to decreasing the amount of overtime that we incur.
So the scenario you laid out would pretty much be a wash. The reason we're saving money this year is because we had so many injuries last year, so many long-term injuries, holdover from COVID, you name it, we had them. And when you hire 4 more firefighters and add 1 to each group, when there's 2 out injured on each group, and then throw in the additional FMLA leaves, those 4 firefighters make a tremendous difference. If
so
you
in
were
that
to
case, new hires does help.
It does help. The more injuries you have, you hire 4 people, that cuts into the overtime quite a bit. But if you were to if we were, as today, we have, the table of organization is 90 including Mary Ann. Of that 89, 84 are fire suppression. There's 4 groups of 21 firefighters each. Depending upon how many injuries there are, if we were to have that entire department healthy as a whole, and you hired more firefighters, that would absolutely reduce the amount of overtime. No doubt. But when you throw in all the injuries, and again, I hate to be redundant, but the sick time, the injuries, the everything we've had, it's just really, really hard to come up with an analysis. I'd love to meet somebody who could do that, because I don't know where to start and where to end.
Okay, so just because I'm trying to make sure I understand what you're saying, it sounds like you're anticipating $330,000 in, projected, and I understand that that's just projected, overtime savings because of the 4 new hires that you were able to make this year. But you don't expect those savings to last for very long, because it will not be very long before those 4 firefighters have reached, more or less the higher end of the pay scale.
They have another year, and then they will have reached top step. Little more than a year.
Okay. Now, you have commented to me before that your department is kind of senior, and I know that contributes to the overall cost of the salaries, because if you've been fighting fires for longer, then we pay you more. But do you have a sense of, to me, it's never seemed to be an advantage to have a very young department or a very, very old department, because no matter what you're doing, you always want to be training up the next group with people who are really well skilled and experienced in whatever it is that you're doing. Do you anticipate that the fire department is looking at a large raft of retirements in the near future?
I know we have 2 coming up at the end of the year. If you were to look at the ages, go down the seniority list and look at the ages, including myself, we're all a little gray under the gills, so there's probably about 20 of us, 18 or 20, that could actually retire in the next year.
That could actually retire and when?
Within the next year.
So, if maybe not everybody's going to choose to retire just because they can, but do you have a plan in place to ensure that the remaining recruits have mentors and people who can train them from our own department?
Well, they get trained in the academy. They go to, it could be up to a 21-week academy. Most of them are 10, depending upon where the academy is. I know the question you're asking, and Ed could probably answer a little bit more articulate than me, but in order for us to have firefighters at the ready, we have to have commitments and documentation that they are retiring. The older firefighters are retiring. That's the only way that I get approval to hire firefighters off the test. The town can vet them, and then and only then can I submit those names to the academy. I can't just call the academy and say, hey, I have 5 people that are ready to go. I have to have all the documentation, and it takes a little bit of time to get that done. In a perfect world, I would have, 5 guys a year telling me, hey, Chief, I'm going down to the retirement board, here's my papers, I'm retiring January 1st or February 1st. It just doesn't work that way.
Okay. Those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Maglio.
Thank you, and thank you for being here, Chief.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions for you also about overtime. And is there a figure for how much was spent on overtime for FY22?
I believe it was 1.4. Yeah. Oh. No, but on FY22.
Oh, yeah, okay. We have it, but we can send it to you.
Yeah. Could we send that to you? I didn't bring that. I have what we've spent to date for FY23.
Okay, I'll take that too.
And that is 984. Oh, excuse me. OT paid year to date last year in 2022 was $1,427,000. Right now we're at $984,000.
And is that including the supplemental?
That includes the supplemental.
Okay.
So what we need to get through the next 6 weeks, that will be obviously your final number, but it will be substantially less than 1.4.
And it'll probably be, okay, so it'll be 984 to date. Now when you say to date, would that be to today or to the date in this?
This was the last pay period, ending overtime pay from 4/22 to 4/28.
So that's April, okay.
Yeah. Excuse me, I have a second one here, 4/29 to 5/5, and those are those numbers that I gave you.
Okay.
So it's actually a week more into it.
Excellent, so that's through May 5th.
Correct.
Okay. And do you have any data around the reasons for the overtime? Like how many people were out? How many shifts were, how many shifts that someone missed in total?
Yes.
What would that be?
It all depends on the person. Are you talking average?
Well, I'm thinking that's a way to get it projecting overtime. If you look at how many shifts are missed due to injury, age, vacation, etc., and you look at how much overtime was spent, and then you see what the those trends are over time. You look at some of the environmental issues, like if there was a major incident or if there was COVID, but that could be the basis of how to do some of that
Well, I mean,
projecting.
just to clarify the overtime, right off the bat, if the allowable firefighters per the contract are off per shift, that triggers hiring overtime. There's 21 firefighters per shift. We have a 17-man minimum. So if 5 are off, you're automatically hiring 1. That's assuming that every shift is fully staffed with 21 firefighters. And to be honest with you, in my 10 years as chief, it has never happened.
What does that mean, you're automatically hiring 1?
Because we have a 17, once you fall below 17, it triggers that number to get back up to 17, so you have to hire overtime to meet that contractual agreement.
Hire overtime.
Yes.
Because you have to bring someone on.
We are contractually required to have 17
And
firefighters
you
on
call
at
that
all times.
hire?
Yes.
Okay, that was my confusion. Okay. But the fact remains that there's a certain amount of shifts
Mm-hmm.
that are filled by someone who's working overtime.
Correct.
And does that number, when you look at the aggregate of that, is that fairly consistent year to year? Do you have that data?
Yeah, I mean, we can get that. I mean, I think last year was an anomaly because it was just a carryover from COVID, and we had a lot of, on-duty injuries, and again, I know I'm not supposed to say it, but the use of FMLA has climbed dramatically, and I believe that my department uses the most of any department in the town, including the schools.
Right. So, I mean, for whatever reason people are off, they need to be, they want to be, they've earned the right to be, they're not feeling well, it's really just being able to predict in order to have a sense of what's needed in the budget so that there's an accurate figure at the beginning of the year so that 3/4 of the way through there isn't a request for another $500,000 or $1 million. That's the reason I'm asking. And I
Right.
know that you've mentioned it's difficult to, so I'm thinking, well, if we can just take some of the bigger numbers and look at that over time, because your contracts have pretty much been in place for a while, so the rules
Long time.
around 17 versus 21 versus 4 groups versus leadership, like all of those things have been in place. And so I'm thinking if there is some data related to that, it would enable some ballpark projections.
I can do that. It's going to take me some time. I can tell you, I mean, you mentioned certain events that happen throughout the year that require overtime. Last year, we had a record number of outdoor fires, brush fires, that we had to hire overtime for. These guys, you can't expect people to be in the woods for 24 hours. It's just not safe. It's not healthy. It's our job, and we do it well, but dehydration sets in, and that's where injuries pile up, so we hire overtime. We'll get another couple of firefighters in there, and give, 2 in, 2 out, that type of thing.
Right. So again, it's not about how many people are doing overtime or why they're doing overtime or how we support firefighters. It's more about being able to predict what that might look like for year to year. Because I think what ends up happening is that numbers go into the budget that are less than what they're really going to be at the end of the year. And so therefore, we're approving a budget that's less than what we need in order just to get it done. And in other departments, they're cutting some of their funds, and there is no supplemental budget that is offered to them. There is no overtime that's offered to them. They just have to do it. And so with certain departments that are contractual and that are more physical jobs and that there's more risk to take on, that maybe is why and what you're explaining is that that's why there's more of a need for overtime. And I'm simply looking at how do we know what that is at the beginning of the year rather than trying to piece it together at the end.
Right. Well, I mean, it's very tough to correlate everything around that manning clause. I know that, comparatively speaking, our other public safety agency, the police, they don't have a minimum manning clause. contractual anyway. So we're in a little bit of a different spot as far as, union and fulfilling our obligations that we agreed to 40, 45 years ago, whenever it was.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while.
Okay. And then you also mentioned it's a $14,000 difference from entry salary to top salary?
Correct. It's about $66,000 to start, and then I think right now it maybe crept up to 81 with the most recent increase.
Okay, so there's a lot of overtime then, because what is the average salary?
I can tell you that I can go top step. There's only steps for privates. That was done away with contractually during the last contract for lieutenants, captains, and deputies. So, did you bring the pay scale? Okay. For top step private is 80, let's call it 81. I believe a lieutenant is 97, and then it goes up 12 each rank.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe the deputies are about 122.
And what about firefighters?
Top step would be 80 for them.
But the
or
average.
81, excuse me.
The average that firefighters with
the average,
their
well,
salary
again,
and
we have
overtime.
I can get you that number, but it's a very senior department. Even the privates are older, in their 40s, some in their 50s, that get on later on in life. So,
how does that impact the average?
It doesn't. It goes by steps. So it impacts the average by the amount of time that you actually have on the job. So once you hit your 2.5 years, whatever it is, you are top step.
Mm-hmm.
And then the steps, again, for the officers have been eliminated, so they go right to top step.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm getting at, and I'm not, maybe I'm just, let me ask it a different way. In looking at the information that we get about firefighter salaries, it looks like there are a significant amount of firefighters that are making over 100. And that is 20,000 higher than the top step. So I'm assuming that's because they're doing extra things. They're taking extra shifts, they're getting stipends, whatever it is. And I'm just curious what that figure is. The average salary, is it 110, 120, 105?
For a firefighter, I don't think it's not even close to 100.
So is there a way we could get that information?
I would have to decipher between private details, which we've had a lot of in the past year or two. That's something that the town does not pay for, obviously. So when you look at the figures of what somebody makes, you have to break that down between their base salary, their overtime, and then their details, which obviously you have to leave out.
Do their details, does that money run through the town, so somebody pays the Braintree Fire and then...
It does.
And then it comes up in there?
It does.
So is there like one figure over, does that get added up so that there's one total at the end of the year?
No, because they're not predictable. Like if somebody's sprinkler system goes down, they need a detail. When we have a house fire or build any type of structure fire, we leave detail there overnight to make sure nothing flares back up. We'll leave either one or two firefighters there with a truck and, an active hose line.
Mm-hmm. So there's different, so that would be one more important figure to know, I guess. Mm-hmm. Is the amount that comes from detail, the amount that comes from overtime, the actual rank, whatever their actual salaries are, whatever their stipends are. I just think that's really rich data, that's information that would be helpful for us to figure out a budget at the beginning of the year that is going to satisfy all the needs, all the overtime, all the work that the fire department is taking on. It would also help to make it a little bit more transparent, because you must know that police and fire are the two departments we get asked for all the time, over and over. And so this is a way to kind of shine a light on what it is that goes into the budgeting for these departments. And so I would like to get that information.
Okay.
That breakdown, and the amount of shifts that are missed because of injuries, time off, et cetera, because there's got to be a correlation between that and the overtime, not the details necessarily, but between that and the overtime. So just having these separate figures will be good to know and good to do some projecting and analysis on. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about is, I know that you mentioned before, and it's referenced in the email you sent, that a majority of calls are for EMT. EMS, thank you. So we don't operate our own EMS, right? Or are these EMS, is that do we have EMS vehicles, or are we also calling in from Brewster?
No, Brewster is obviously our private ambulance provider. We go to every medical call with them and assist. Most of the time, these medical calls need, an ambulance has 2 paramedics on it. One of them will be doing an analysis, if that's what you want to call it, on a patient. We come in, we transport them. We get them packaged up, so to speak, and we get them on the stretcher, and we usually do that for the paramedics. So it's a much more than a 2-man job, I can tell you that. Especially with car accidents, we're the primary caregivers in car accidents. They can't crawl under cars, the medics, they're not trained for that. So that's where our expertise comes in a little bit more than the medics would. But they're always there with us to transport. We don't transport patients. We don't have the vehicles to do that.
So do you sub that out? Do you contract with them? Is there a monthly fee that is paid? How does that happen?
No, we just they're contractually obligated to provide 3 ambulances with 2 paramedics on each ambulance. That's their contractual obligation to the town. There's no financial payment. We actually pay them, was it $3,000 a year? Yeah. $3,000 a year, so they run our dispatch.
So when you say it's contractually obligated, it's because there was an agreement made with Brewster?
Yes, we put it out to bid in 2014, and we narrowed it down to 5 companies, including the one that we had prior, which was here for 19 years, and what Brewster offered was just off the charts. And
what is it that they get in return for providing us with 3 EMSs with 2 people each?
Money.
What is the money they get?
The money is the transports. Anytime they take someone to the hospital.
So we don't pay for that. The person being transported's insurance pays for that?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Braintree, I believe, is a 92% insurance town, meaning it's attractive for ambulance providers because they know they're getting 92% of what they're putting out back.
Okay. Thank you. I think entries. I think that was.
One correction. It was $30,000 a year, not $3,000. My mistake.
So we pay $30,000 for the dispatch.
$30,000, yes.
Okay.
Still a bargain, but.
Do we? And their dispatch is we're paying. I don't know. How does that work?
They have a dedicated fire dispatch. Every ambulance company has to have their own dispatch. That's the law. Brewster, as I'm sure you know, you've probably seen their new building in Weymouth. It's probably 5 years old now, but they have a very large dispatch, and they have a dedicated fire dispatcher at all times for us.
So when we call 911, are we calling Brewster?
Yes.
Or
it will
when we get
go
connected?
through the police and Brewster.
Okay.
We monitor it. So that gives us the ability to jump the calls.
I gotcha. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Back to you.
Thank you, Councilman Maglio. So I'm going to give the floor to Madam President. She has a few questions to follow up with.
Thank you, Chairman Reynolds. Two things to follow up on Councilor Maglio and Councilor Flaherty's questioning on overtime, and maybe this will, I'm trying to simplify everything because it's complicated. So at its core, you're budgeting for FY24 $781,000 for overtime, which is actually less than the budgeted value for last year. But in reality, if you add in the $600,000 that is coming in through supplemental funding, FY23's overtime is 1.38-ish. So I think the concern that I'm hearing and share is we're essentially budgeting for half of what we actually spent in FY23. We're budgeting half for the upcoming year than we spent in this year. I think that's the heart of the matter. Mm-hmm. Because we don't have a whole lot of extra money to play around with. So if I guess, why are we budgeting half with an aging department, as you've mentioned? Is it to make the numbers work?
I believe so. I think it, again, if in a perfect world, if we had the 21 firefighters per group and everyone came to work and nobody was hurt or sick or things that happen every day, we wouldn't need all that money for overtime. You're probably looking at that $700,000 number.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're clear that we're budgeting for less than we know we're going to need for overtime.
We're basically budgeting for, we're not accounting for injuries. We're not accounting for major incidents. We're not accounting for a lot of things that pop up during the course of the year.
Okay, okay. I'll leave that for now. Thank you, Chief. And then the second thing, which maybe actually might be for our HR team, in terms of the average salary that Councilor Maglio was asking after, to get an estimate, which is also what I think Councilor Maglio was after, in Appendix L on page 77, our fire total for salaries is about $9.4 million. So to get an estimate, can we just divide that by the number of firefighters for an average salary for the fire department?
For an average, yeah.
Okay, so maybe that would, I don't know, but that was one math exercise I was doing while I was listening to you. Through the chair.
Councilor Maglio.
The question is, though, what does that $9 million reference?
That's base salaries.
For how long?
Page 77. And Appendix L.
Okay. It does include longevity, which we pay out, and the stipends that we also pay out. We have about 6 stipends that are about $5,000 a piece.
Mm-hmm. So this includes, the 9.4 includes stipends, overtime, details?
No.
It does not include overtime, it does not include details.
Oh, it does not include
The
overtime.
base pay plus any stipends.
Just base plus stipends. And then do we have because then, I had taken a list of total salaries. That was when we had an email back and forth, and those total salaries for FY22 were $12 million.
Okay.
So that's where I was confused about this number. But base plus stipend, so you're saying this could be an average that we could,
If you took that and divided by the total number of firefighters, or
and that's what's projected for FY '24?
Correct.
Okay, no overtime or detail. All right, thank you.
Council Maglio. Council Berica.
Thank you, Chairman. All right, a couple other questions I have, Chief. I know this year we did not have anything in the capital budget for our fire buildings, so the 3 stations or any trucks. But I want to focus on the buildings because I know that the headquarters is under renovation, is hopefully soon going to be getting renovated. I understand no capital was allotted for the firefighting buildings, the fire stations, because it's budgeted for. But what I see in building repairs is only $5,000 for the 3 stations. So my question is that really all we have for building repairs for our 3 stations? And what is our plan if something, if the air conditioning goes out, if there's a leak, if anything really even minor, let alone catastrophic, happened to any of our 3 stations?
Usually it's 25,000. Is that reduced it?
I don't know how it works.
I'm assuming that's a typo. It can't be $5,000.
Do I have it? I might have it. Okay. Hopefully my thing is a typo.
Page 43
Thank you, Chairman.
of tab F. It looks like there's a description cut off for maintenance, space R. Repairs, I'm assuming?
Is it 524002? No, that's equipment. Building, 5,000.
I have 543001.
1, yes, thank you, Chairman.
Okay. I think so. This should be the building repair. We have 3 buildings. Okay.
Through the chair, if we could just, we'll research that and get back to you with an answer tomorrow. I don't want
Yes.
to hold up the...
Well, I'll ask the council president who questioned. You're okay with that?
That's fine for a follow-up, and thank you for taking a closer look at that.
If I could just clarify a little bit as far as the stations go, as you mentioned, we do anticipate by the end of the year, the first of the year, construction being started on headquarters. East Braintree Station was done over completely in 2017. We do have a couple of problems down there. The air conditioners you ironically mentioned. We're getting prices on that. We think we may be able, with rebates, we may be able to get what we need for basically nothing. We have a leak in the cupola, which facilities is taken care of. Other than that, the building is in great shape. The Highlands is 26, 27 years old. I'm sure in the next few years it's going to start to need some work, but right now it's pretty good. Other than general maintenance that we do, we have to pay for on generators and things like that. We're in pretty good shape.
Thank you.
Not $5,000 good shape, but
I think it's worth maybe stating the obvious that over many years we have been deferring maintenance across all of our town buildings. We know where we're at with the schools, and we're going to talk about that on Wednesday. And, you know, whether it's fire or any of our other buildings, $5,000, $10,000 even, we could double it, is I know, not sufficient to maintain 3 state-of-the-art fire departments for our residents. So we need to just be very thoughtful about the choices we're making as a community, especially around our public safety facilities. I have one more question, if I may,
Yes,
Mr.
right
Chairman.
ahead.
On the regional dispatch center, which we talked about during our capital, the capital evening, which we're getting a $4 million grant for, are we anticipating that to provide savings for Braintree once that is implemented, and how are we going to realize that, and what is the timeline?
I believe we're about a year and a half out from getting that up and running. For the fire department, it's a $300,000 savings.
And how are you calculating that?
Because we monitor the desk. We have a side agreement with the union has a side agreement with the town, and it costs us roughly $300,000 a year to have a monitor on that dispatch, in our dispatch, to jump those calls, which honestly it pays off numerous ways.
And is that folded into the salaries that we were just talking about? That $300,000 is, where is that captured in our budget?
That's in a separate line item.
But it's part of the overall $9.9 million?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Just as a follow-up on that last question, what line is it in?
Yeah, it would be under like desk men.
All right, so I want to know, so as far as I would like to recommend that as a follow-up to that question to the Council President's inquiry, we would like to know, have a written summary of that in an email to us. I would be interested also in knowing, you had mentioned the fact that there are costs, I think is what you inferred, that there are costs covered in your maintenance of your various buildings by our facilities maintenance team. And I would like to ask the finance director to give us the line item that came out of in the DPW budget covering those costs. Just from an informational standpoint, we would appreciate that. Okay. Because it's important, I think, that we all understand the level of work that and dependence we have as a town on the facilities team. There's a limited number of people and a limited budget. So we just want to make sure that we're understanding how all of those costs are, and I know there'll be a lot more questions around that when we bring back the facilities team on the evening that we'll also be dealing with the school budget. So thank you. We appreciate that, Chief of Staff.
Counselor, can I ask you a question?
Yes. Go right ahead, Chief.
When you said you wanted a written summary about our dispatch monitoring?
No. There was the question. So there was the question that Council President had asked about monies for your repairs. We were talking about
station repairs.
your maintenance, right, your station repairs. You had made a reference when after as a response to her question of that number of $5,000 looks pretty low, and how are you covering your repairs? And you did recite some of the things that your physical buildings do need from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
We would like to know if facilities is covering those costs for you.
Well, each station has a generator, obviously, that we would rely on in an outage of any type, and we have a private contractor that maintains those. Facilities doesn't maintain those.
Right, but you had made an inference that there was some types of repairs that
right. You've seen the building.
Well, no, I understand that. So, right, all of that we understand.
Yeah.
Again, I think just from an accounting standpoint, that's what we're after.
Okay.
Just from a monetary accounting standpoint, where how much of your repairs that you need are actually being paid for out of the facilities budget.
Okay, I can talk to Mike McGurty about that.
Yeah, if you could do that, and we could give the line item is what we'd like to know of what line items of the facilities budget are these funds coming out of to cover your costs.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Terrific. Madam President, anything further on that? Okay. Great.
You're welcome.
Okay, so some of my questions have been answered, Chief, but obviously there's a lot of discussion here about overtime. There's a whole history we all know about, and you've given us the history of the difficulties and the challenges to managing overtime. And I listened to your responses. I listened to some of the things that we've talked about and how these costs are really constraining you. So I'm going to ask these next few questions around overtime. So there was you had made some mention about some contractual constraints or obligations that you need to make as the fire chief. And so through the years, we have had a number of changes to shifts, how the shifts are meaning that we went to a 24-hour shift.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
And when was that actually instituted?
I believe it was about 15 years ago.
About 15 years ago. And what was the rationale behind going to a 24-hour shift versus what were the shifts prior to that? Were they 8-hour shifts?
No, it was split between day and night. A day shift would be from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., and then a night would be 6 p.m.
Okay, 10-hour shifts?
10-hour and 14-hour shifts.
Okay, so, and the salaries were based on what? 8 hours worked and then overtime, or for the number of hours they actually worked with straight time?
Well, you had a base salary and then you had a night differential.
Okay.
Which we still have rolled
all right,
in.
so there wasn't any overtime factored into those hours as you had just described them as constituted?
No.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. I appreciate that. And what were some of the drivers behind going to a 24-hour shift?
Off the top of my head, from just memory, the push that the union made was that it would save money.
And? We see that certainly it costs a heck of a lot more money. But anyway, so let me ask a few more questions about the 24-hour shift impact. So you've got a firefighter scheduled for a 24-hour shift, and that firefighter calls in sick.
Mm-hmm.
So how many sick days does a firefighter get each year?
15.
15 days. Okay. And are those 15 days, are they quantified as 24 hours, or are they quantified as 8 hours?
They're quantified in shifts. So if
I have 15 sick days, I have 15 24-hour sick days I can call in.
You could call in 15 nights.
15 24-hour sick days. Is that what I'm hearing?
No. If you called in sick today and then came in for your night shift, you're still charged with a sick shift. It doesn't matter if it's day or night.
So your 24-hour shift is actually broken into 2 shifts?
It's broken into a day shift and a night shift.
Okay, one individual would work a day shift followed by a night shift, and that
Yes.
constitutes a 24-hour shift.
Correct.
Okay. So a person could call in sick for half a shift?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. And a personal day, same factor?
Yes. Vacation, personal.
Okay. Okay. Vacation?
Mm-hmm.
Same. Okay. So, going back to, if someone called in sick for the entirety of a 24-hour shift, they get charged for 2 sick days?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. 2 sick days. And what happens if somebody goes over their sick day allocation?
We have in the contract right now, it's 10 days, and our most recent negotiations, it's now 8 days that I can step in and require a note.
So beyond the 15, you can go up to 8 additional days without a note? Is that what you're saying?
No, not beyond the 15, before the 15.
But you're saying if a person took a consecutive number of sick days?
Yes.
All right, up to 8 or 10?
If you have 3 consecutive sick days, you have to provide me a note.
All right, understood. Thank you. But if somebody has 15 sick days they have already used, and they're now asking for more, they can't come to work for whatever reason, how does that work from an administrative standpoint?
Because sick time is carried over, unlimited. So you could have 300 sick days on the book.
Okay, so all right, so that most often, then what we're seeing is that the case? Most of your firefighters have a number of sick days piled up or whatever you want to call them, stashed. I don't know what the term is. But
it's accumulated sick time, and again, most injuries happen to the older firefighters.
Okay, and what about vacation days? You're allowed to carry over all your vacation days that you don't use?
I believe you can buy back 2 and carry 1.
For vacation. If you
Yes.
don't use it, you lose it, outside of those 3
Correct.
opportunities. Okay. And on personal leave, or an administrative leave, for payroll purposes, a firefighter will continue to get paid on administrative leave.
Depending upon what the situation is.
So it's a case-by-case
Yes.
situation. Okay. And that does not count against their sick, their personal, or vacation time?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So, so I guess the picture I'm seeing right now is a 24-hour shift really put a fire chief in a bind. It didn't work out. And we're paying the price every year for it. And you're paying the price for it every year.
I'm paying the price right now.
So I would, yes you are. You are paying the price right now because you have the big shoulders, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, is this something that's ever brought up from a negotiation standpoint to say this is unsustainable model?
It has been in the past, yes.
What about this year?
Not so much this year. There's not a lot of success. I've had 2013, 16, 19.
Who's bargaining? Who's doing the bargaining on this? I mean, for me, these numbers are stark. And whose need is getting addressed? Firefighters have very dangerous jobs, and I greatly appreciate what they do. Absolutely, there is no qualm there whatsoever, at all. However, there has to be a level of reasonableness when you are not even coming close to managing overtime. And I sympathize with you because it's a dangerous job, it's a tough job on the body. You're going to have your sick day. You're going to have people injured on a regular basis. You can pretty much count on it, right? So, why isn't that reflected in the budget or in the contractual? We protect these firefighters. You do a great job of protecting them. But, I mean, this is a very unpopular stance I'm sure I'm taking right now. Someone's probably screaming at the TV, right? I'm sure of it. But
Probably
It's a tough
me.
question. It's a tough question that has to be asked. I'm an operations guy. When I look at these cost overruns, well, I just can't say, my job's on the line. But so is the efficiency of the operation you're trying to perform. So, you got a problem. We can't seem to find the solution through technique A or technique B. We keep trying to find a different technique. And in my opinion, contract negotiations was a great opportunity for this town to address without giving up anything in protections or benefits to our firefighters.
Mhm.
The 24-hour shift, I believe, would save you a lot of money. Just like that, whoever came to you and said, or came to the town because you weren't the chief 15 years ago,
Mhm.
to say, this is going to save us a lot of money.
Right.
So, all right. So we all know that this is really a tough a tough situation. It's a very tough situation. And so, we have enough. Has that contract been signed? Been agreed upon by the firefighters?
In principle, yes. It's
In principle.
It's been ratified by the
Okay.
union.
All right. Okay. I see that as a bargaining chip, as an opportunity to be addressed. And the fact that it wasn't addressed, I got to wonder. Why?
We have addressed it in past contracts. It usually goes nowhere because the town would have to give up so much in order to change that system.
Well, what did the town give up to give the 24 hours to begin with?
I honestly don't remember.
Right. So
I-
it's about a thing about fairness. I come from a union family. I support unions. I understand the importance of protection of workers because of unions and the quality of life. But there's a level of reasonableness where there's a line that just doesn't make sense to the operations and the mission at hand that we're all agreeing have to be taken care of. So, this is very systemic, I think, of why we have such an out of control overtime budget with our fire department. And granted, adding more people to a shift is a great idea, but to your point also, that's not going to eliminate or mitigate the propensity or the likelihood of a firefighter on a shift is going to get hurt by the nature of their job. It's a dangerous job.
Mhm.
So, it really is. I honestly think that a much, much larger discussion has to occur to address this problem. That includes the mayor's office, includes you, includes finance, includes HR, includes the unions. A much, much more higher level rather than just evidently the collective bargaining process isn't good enough to address or to give you the tools to do your job in trying to control overtime. And saying, oh, my hands are tied and that's no knock on you, Chief, but
I know it's not an answer
Right.
that the council wants to hear, but that's the truth.
Oh, as a taxpayer, I don't want to hear.
I'm a taxpayer too.
Right.
And I don't want to hear it. But I didn't sign the contracts. I didn't do this
Well,
15 years ago.
we know who signs the contracts.
We do. We do.
So maybe we should ask that person this question. So, all right. And we will. We will. But, okay. A desk man, is that the individual you spoke of that is going to be replaced, that will be replaced by the new dispatch center?
Yes.
Okay. And that desk man, is that part of your minimum manning?
No.
Okay. So is that desk man paid a regular salary, shift salary, or is it overtime? I do
turns
see
out-
that it's a pretty large overtime here on
Right.
your breakout, 184,000 plus.
So, yeah, so I mean, just going by what we've already discussed and the amount of injuries, obviously that's going to be overtime as well. It's at a reduced rate. Overtime that we agreed upon is $45 an hour instead of the standard overtime rate, which I think is
Okay,
15.
so there was an agreement, but it's still
It's still
overtime.
costly.
Yeah.
It's still costly. And in the very rare times where we have we have 18 men, so to speak, 18 firefighters. That 18th will be on that desk for a $5 an hour stipend. It doesn't happen all that often, but the idea of it when this was generated was that it would kind of be a 50-50, and then, it's just kind of gone south.
Okay, so, and I understand the importance of having that individual, we've had this conversation in the past.
Yeah, it's very
a number
important.
of times, and from an operational standpoint, we need to find a way, and it sounds like that this dispatch center is going to provide a solution.
Yes.
Right,
Yes,
will provide
thankfully.
a solution. So that's a good step.
Mm-hmm.
Give you credit on that one. Absolutely. Okay. I'm going to stop on the overtime. All right. And just a couple of other questions I may have here. Being the bean counter at times I have to be, so on telephones, under fire administration, you've got a 47% increase. What do you attribute that to, just out of curiosity? It's not a significant increase over what you actually spent the previous year, but what would you attribute that to?
I would say just a general increase in utilities as it stands. I mean,
Is
everything
it billing? Is it cell phones? Is it landlines?
It's landlines, it's cell phones. The landlines, have multiple connections. We have private alarm companies that we're hooked up to as well.
Did you change services at all or something in the last year or two?
No.
Is it tied into anything that the town contracts with?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. I'd be curious. You can follow up on that if
Sure.
you would. Thank you. Just if we can have a little more insight into that. Lighting, I can understand. Lighting has gone up 29%. I also know, has there been construction over the last year?
At
headquarters?
No.
Okay. All right. Water sewer rates have gone up. Understand that. Custodial. Is that the contract? That's up by 233%.
Paper products have crushed us.
Custodial?
Yes. Again,
So-
to manage 3 stations with all the paper goods and,
What was the big
toiletries,
jump?
cleaning.
What was the big, was it costs?
Absolutely, yeah.
Material. Cost of
Yeah,
material.
we use Arrow paper, and we switched from the previous vendor about 5 years ago to Arrow because they gave us a better deal. And I just think it's inflation, honestly.
Got it.
I think
I mean,
we're
the
all
number
going
is,
through the same
the percentage increase is an ugly looking number.
Oh,
but
it's crazy.
It's only about $6,000, right? So,
Yeah.
just out of curiosity from a year over year, kind of, I'm curious, what's that cost attribute to? I want to understand it, so thank you, I appreciate that. Equipment maintenance, that's gone up by 22%. I know it's imperative that your maintenance of your equipment be done and be in top shape, always.
Right. There's
So is there
certain
any-
safety standards we
Is
have
it
to
additional
adhere to.
is it additional equipment that you may have procured during the year that you didn't have in the previous year?
It is, quite honestly, we have not an older fleet of apparatus, but we have some apparatus that are 20 years old. We have a rescue truck that was donated by the T, which takes up a little bit of money. And the older these trucks get, the more repairs they need. And that's where you're seeing that increase.
Great. Thank you, Chief.
Sure.
All right. Parts and accessories, I see you've had a big drop there, well, $5,000 drop. And I take this probably just better management, but it could reflect on the maintenance that you're doing.
It's partly because we do have 2 newer vehicles. So, kind of the other side of it.
There you
and
go.
we also have a mechanic that we have on a retainer basis. He does a really good job for us
Great.
with maintaining these vehicles every weekend, so he saves us a bit of money.
I want to make sure you get the good, you get the attaboy for
Yeah,
that
he's,
one. I mean,
he's
you're-
fantastic.
Right.
I don't know what we'd do without him.
You deserve it. I mean, really. So, all right, fire suppression. Let's see. Administration is up. Again, it's a 228% jump, but we're looking at last year's actual. It gives me a negative 90,000 number in that category. That's page 45, line item 004.
Okay.
So last year's actual was negative 90,599. What does that mean? What does that mean? If you don't have an answer, if you could follow up.
We have a grant writer, Dan Cross, who has procured somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 million
Okay.
over the past 6-7 years.
Okay.
He's very, very good at his job and saves this town a lot of money for a $5,000 stipend. So we do get quite a...
So could you explain, it sounds like where maybe the answer is that the fact that you had a decrease of $90,000 in that category due to the fact that you were able to procure or secure free money through the grant process, and significantly so.
Yes.
Okay, so maybe you can give us just a little bit of insight on that, if you would. You don't have to do it this evening. If you could just give me a little summary on that, give us a summary on that.
All right, I will get you.
That is a great story to tell, Chief. Okay. But this year you're spending $9,000, so has Dan been on vacation?
I'll take care of him.
All right. Well, a great job.
He does.
All right. Okay. So with that, you have yourself a higher level of confidence in this administration total number, where you're looking at an 82. You're looking to actually add money this year I'm assuming as a safeguard to have it there, in the event that that you won't get the results as you had last fiscal year. Right, got it. Prudent. All right. I'm going to stay in that same line. Third item, 511017, working OU. I don't know what that is. Is it a cutoff?
That's out of grade. That
Out
means,
of grade. Thank you.
That actually saves the town money.
Yep. Thank you. That's all you needed to say. Thank you. Okay. And we already talked about overtime. And we talked about a reduction. It looks like you're going to have a reduction in the fire alarm repair. I'm assuming that you have made significant progress town-wide in doing all of the work that you had.
Captain Joe Beauvais has done an unbelievable job. What we've done, we had a 5-year plan. Captain Mark Johnson started it. He sat down with me and said, you know what, most communities are getting rid of street boxes because with the advent of cell phones, computers, everything like that, those old fire plans from the homes in the middle of the night just don't cut it anymore because everybody's got a cell phone. So these things are so expensive to maintain. And if you look at the pile of disconnected fire alarm boxes sitting in Town Hall, you'd see how the age of these things, and to replace them would be a monumental cost. So what we've done is basically gone around to every company except the municipal buildings that were tied into the fire alarm system and told them that they had to go to a private alarm. It actually saves them money.
Good.
Instead of the cost that they pay to the town. It's a money saver all around. And I think right now we're down to about 7 or 8 boxes. And those are on municipal buildings.
We'll applaud you on that. That's a great job, and I know Captain or Lieutenant Beauvais?
Captain Beauvais.
Captain Beauvais. Classmate of mine from high school. Great guy. He is very focused, very professional individual. So, great job. And just one last question for you,
Sure.
Chief, and it is the fireboat budget. Equipment, you have a 606% increase there. It's roughly, again, it's only a little over $4,000. Are you, everything okay with the boat?
Yeah, so we had, it takes a while. We've had that fireboat for 5 years, I think, 6 years. It actually takes a while for the other communities to realize that you have a fireboat, even though it's in running cards.
Yeah.
So you're going to get used more each year for various incidents. So we'll respond. I think the closest fireboat to us going south is Situate, and going north is obviously Boston.
Right.
So we're called, they'll have one boat coming one way, another boat coming another way, for numerous calls, whether it's an oil leak from a boat, a boater in distress, somebody overboard, things like that.
Got it.
And again, Captain Bob Leone has done an unbelievable job with that boat over the years. It's quite an asset to have.
It is. I would agree with you.
Yeah, and we got it on the cheap too, so.
Yeah.
Dan Cross.
Dan Cross,
Yeah.
I remember that. All right, excellent. Chief, that's all I have. Thank you. I appreciate your time. I'd look forward to some of those follow-up clarifications.
Okay.
That'd be great. I just want to ask my fellow committee members if they have any follow-up questions or comments. No? Okay. Thank you. We're all set then, Chief. We appreciate your time this evening. And Mary Ann, thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Next up we have is the police budget for fiscal '24. Looks like we have the chief here with us. Welcome, Chief DuBois. How are you this evening?
Doing great. How about yourself?
Excellent. Thank you very much. So you have with you Sergeant Chambers, and I'm very sorry. I know you're new to the organization in the last year.
Mary Kenny is our Director of Finance.
Mary?
Yes.
Okay, Mary, I'm very sorry. My apologies. Yeah, but we've heard great things about you. And what we're seeing as far as numbers goes, it looks like you're really bringing a lot of value. And I know working next to that guy next to you there, he's got a lot of experience. All right. So, Chief, how would you like to start? Any things you'd like to comment? Any opening statements?
Sure. I can just give you a brief overview. So, the proposed fiscal ¡24 budget totals $12,556,600. It's an approximate increase of $222,289. Or to 1.8% over our current fiscal year. The increase is almost exclusively related to salary-related increases anticipated as a result of contract negotiations, step increases, and some improved staffing levels for fiscal '24. The department was fortunate enough to welcome 7 officers earlier in the year, and 4 just recently, as of actually today, was their first official day working at the police department. So keeping that in mind, it's 94.4% of our department total operating budget relates to personnel and contractual salaries, related line items, and about 5.6% relates to operating expenses. I can highlight some of the changes or the additions that we're anticipating for fiscal '24. So we're adding additional school resource officer to our special services program. We reestablished the traffic unit, beginning with 1 sergeant and 1 patrol officer. We're adding 2 K-9 assignments, 1 patrol later in the year, and 1 narcotics detection dog, which is currently in training. To support which was supported by the Working Dog Foundation. And we're also establishing regular marine patrols using our new patrol boat, which was essentially funded through the Port Authority of a grant of $300,000. It cost us a little bit more than that. We're expanding some services in the family services unit. Then we have some improved coverage in the Detective Bureau with investigative capacity in that area, and also trying to maintain adequate patrol staffing levels to provide services throughout the town. So that's a highlight. You have a big picture view.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that, Chief. So I'm going to ask Councilor Flaherty to open up her questions. And again, what we're going to do is you have a number of categories in your budget. Each of the councils will just take the entire budget, any questions they may have, instead of us going through with each individual section.
Okay.
Thank you. It's a pretty stable budget, so we feel as if that would work for us this evening. Go right ahead.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for coming out tonight. I have a few questions. I think you're going to get a few questions about overtime, and I have some of those as well.
Sure.
But before I get there, I noted in your budget, as a consequence of a conversation that we had with the fire department ahead of you, that the police department has $25,000 noted for building repair. And the town has one of the themes of this budget review has been to sort of suss out where facilities pays for things and where individual departments pay for things. And so I'm curious if you can characterize what kinds of building repairs you think you'll be able to tackle using the money that comes out of the police budget, the $25,000 that is going to come out of the police budget, as opposed to whatever facilities will spend on the police department this year.
I'll tackle this one. Thank you, sir. So building repairs, largely the facility's contribution to our building repairs is constituted by labor. So oftentimes we will still end up paying for the materials for the repairs. An example I can give you from early on this fiscal year, our back door that I think was the original back door for the building, I think it was a $7,500 door to replace. I believe the facilities installed the door, but we had to pay the $7,500 for that actual door. So there are some small things that facilities absorbs in terms of materials, but on the bigger projects, we fund it through that building repairs account. And then as well as any smaller repairs that our custodian might be able to make, or small items like from the hardware store, et cetera. And then also within that same program, we have our equipment maintenance budget, which is largely service contracts with external providers. For example, our HVAC is serviced quarterly by T.G. Gallagher, and also any repairs that need to be made to the HVAC are performed by them. So that would also come out of the building repairs account. And then we have like fire alarm testing, fire extinguishers, those types of things that we have contracts in place for that come out of the equipment maintenance budget.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful. I hope the materials budget goes very, very, very far for you. The next question that I have has to do with the overtime that you have budgeted. Because our budget is so difficult this year, it's really important for us to identify the areas where overtime is so difficult to project, and it's also a very large sum of money. And so that's the reason why we ask all these questions concerning overtime. But it is furthermore really important to put the best number on overtime that you can. And so the question that I have on it has to do with the overtime for police communications, where it's line 012 1005513 on page 36, if you're looking at the blue book. We've budgeted $40,000 this year. We budgeted $40,000 in FY23, but our actuals for FY23 are $148,000. So I know that you anticipate your overtime to be less this year because of additional hires, so I can think maybe that's the answer to this, but I wanted to ask for your explanation for why what we're budgeting is so much lower than what our actuals are this year and have been in years past.
If I may, for Program 5, the communications overtime, the reason that if you were to, say, compare the $40,000 budgeted amount to actuals, it's all a function of timing for our 911 grant, the support and incentive grant that we get from the state 911 department. So we usually anticipate a certain amount of money to come in from that, which reimburses us for overtime. Depending on our reimbursement schedule, sometimes we apply for reimbursement of salary instead of overtime, so that we can close out the grant funding period before the end of our fiscal year. So that's, I think, what happened last year. We ended up applying a good chunk of the 911 grant towards salary instead of overtime. But for reference, this current fiscal year and for next fiscal year, the 911 support and incentive grant revenues are going to be about $142,000 that would be eligible towards salary or overtime. And then there's a small amount that goes towards a subscription for RAVE 911. And then in terms of overall overtime, I'll turn it back to the Chief.
That's great. I didn't know you had a 911 grant, so that's good to know. Who writes these glorious grants that render so much money for the town?
One of the officers, Billy Donlin, does a lot of the grant writing. So that's a pretty standard 911 grant, which is essentially the same department that's funding the whole communication center that we're in the midst of. So we got $4 million. We're waiting for the second award, which should come out sometime in June, I believe, for probably the same amount. So, and then once that's done, they actually fund quite a bit of the salaries for the first few years. So you had asked earlier about some potential savings. So we anticipate some pretty significant savings for the dispatch center in maybe the first 3 to 5 years of that center being operational. I don't know what the exact amount will be because it's going to be dependent upon what the grant allows at the time and what our costs will be, but that's another part of this.
Okay, and can you talk about the extent to which the additional hires might further reduce the amount of overtime that you have, or do you feel like the ones that you are onboarding in the coming fiscal year will be sufficient?
No, they're definitely going to save some staffing concerns. We were down 11 people throughout this whole year, essentially. The new hires the 7, they became operational only about a month ago after they got off field training in the academy. And the other 4 just got out of the academy last week. They started today, so they have 12 weeks of field training. So they'll be operational and plugged into the patrol sometime probably the end of July. Looks like, say, August 1st. So for the majority of the next fiscal year. So that has a major impact on our patrol overtime, which is a vast majority of what our overtime is. So we're backfilling to just have minimum levels of staffing on every shift. And when we're at minimum staff, as soon as somebody takes a shift off for whatever reason, and as you can imagine, there's countless justifications for somebody not to come to work, whether it's a change in duties or training or sick or vacation or whatever, we're immediately filling those shifts just to have the minimum staffing. So when we replenished those 11 bodies, it allowed us to put 2 people into the traffic unit. It allowed us to put an additional school resource officer, which they're not going to start until after this field training program is over. So that's going to happen at the end of the summer as far as them actually getting out there and doing that job. But we made the assignments, so we know what's going on with shift fitting. but we're still going to have additional officers on every shift so we can absorb people taking the time off throughout the whole year. So it is an estimate. So the number we came up with is our best case scenario. It's probably a little bit low, in all honesty, with if we're in, you know, very limited injuries, very limited people out for whatever reason, you know, maybe unexpected retirement or something that we just don't anticipate. You know, worst case scenario is we're at what the level we're at this year, you know, which is vastly different. So we're hoping we're somewhere closer to what we're budgeting with staffing. You know, continuing in the trend that we have, we feel like we're in pretty good shape, and that's why we started the traffic unit, because that was a big demand and a big need for the community and for us to provide that service. So we feel like we're at that staffing level that we can afford to do that.
I think the addition of the traffic unit will be very pleasing to residents until they are pulled over.
Always. And honestly, the school resource position, we had one school resource officer, we're adding a second one. And just so you, I guess to kind of speak about our cooperation with the schools is, we had people apply that were interested in, one of the deputy chiefs and the superintendent and the principal from, I think, the middle school are the ones who interviewed. So we let the schools interview the person that they're going to be assigned down there. So we work very closely with the schools, and that was a big need that we felt we needed to really fulfill. So we're really looking forward to that. The Family Services Unit is probably one of the busiest group of people we have, and they fall under that, so it's constant. So it's going to be a big help in that area that we provide service to for the schools. So looking forward to that too.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Maglio.
Thank you. So you've talked about a few of the things that I wanted to ask about. With the Family Services Unit, how big is that unit?
Not nearly as big as we wish it was. So we have Sergeant Brian Cahoon, who runs it. We have Officer St. Ives, Jay St. Ives, the two school resource officers now, and then we have the clinicians. So
Evidence as well.
no, evidence is under family services though. And then the clinicians, so we have an administrative / clinician who is basically teaching classes. So we train pretty much everybody the South Shore in CIT. So there's an 8-hour course and a 40-hour course that we administer, and we do it in Braintree, and then we travel also. So that clinician does that and is available to us for a co-responder. And then we have 2 other full-time co-responders that work with the officers out on patrol. And then we also have a part-time administrator.
What's that?
Oh, yeah, probably the most important aspect of that is all the clinicians are all funded through the Department of Mental Health. So that's, and all the overtime for the officers, they cover actually a lot of the additional costs other than their base salary for the Family Services Unit. So we're very fortunate to have that grant, and Sergeant Brian Cahoon almost in daily contact with them, begging them for more money every day, and he's pretty good at it. He's a very, very tough negotiator.
So that sounds like it's about 10 people?
We got at full staffing, yeah, it would be about 10.
10, okay. And the school resource officers are part of that unit?
Yes.
That is fantastic. So that was the next thing I wanted to ask about. What is the role of the school resource officer at the current one we have and the anticipated role for the one that we're adding?
Well, simply it's they work in the schools and deal with any issues that come out of the school. So we had one, so she was covering everything. So we're splitting it up with the high school and then really the middle school, really the two high users or high need for them. The elementary schools I don't think as demanding, although they respond there if necessary. So they're the liaison obviously between the police department and the schools and the families. So when there's an issue with the schools that the administration or teachers identify, They contact the school resource officer directly, and there's a follow-up at the school. I would say it's almost daily they're getting involved in some type of incident of some sort that they resolve at their level in the school for the most part. And then, honestly, there's normally a very typical follow-up with the families outside of school that's required. So they kind of they're basically detectives, juvenile detectives is really how you could look at it in that regard.
So do they have the services of the clinicians?
I would say yes and no. I mean, the schools, I believe, have their own clinicians.
Not many.
No. I mean, they certainly could if they need to. I mean, they'll do follow-up outside of the school with the clinicians. I'm not so sure that the clinicians go into the schools very often. Yeah. It's not like they're prohibited from doing that. I think it's just the role that they fall under. The schools have a lot of their own resources that they would use with the school resource officer.
So the only reason I said that, I really don't know how many clinical staff schools have, but I know that we are very short on mental health support services.
Sure.
And that there's very little of that happening at any of our schools. And so anything more that we can get is very welcome, particularly if there's like cross-department support and cultivation and integration and all of that. Getting back to the school resource officer and do they bring more of a police presence into the school, or are they bringing in more of a family services, mental health support role into the school?
I would say both, depending on the situation. Is a lot of just support they need. I would say, I don't know, very rarely, maybe once in the last couple of years, would they arrest somebody in the school. That's extremely rare. Even if there's incidents in there, they address it in, the less impactful way possible. It's definitely more of a social service approach. I mean, there's certainly law enforcement aspects of it because they're police officers, and we do get issues that require police response there. But they're the primary contact between the administration, the staff, and the police department, and they facilitate a lot of calls that prevent like lights and sirens from showing up at the high school because say there's an altercation in the cafeteria during lunchtime, the officer's already there. So it's not going to be this very big disruption to the school where everybody's looking out because there's sirens outside or whatnot. And they also build up a very strong relationship with all the students and the staff. So they know the kids, they know their friends, they know how to react, they have a good relationship with a lot of the students. And that comes in very helpful, say, when they're missing, run away, we're looking for somebody, we will call the school resource officer late at night, say, hey, who's this, student hang out with, that type of thing. So they're a great resource in that regard too. So we use them as much as we can. It's the juvenile issues predominantly, and that's really what their specialty is.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's helpful. And the fact that there is a social services approach to their work is really important. So I would imagine then that they have a different type of training or additional training than other patrol officers, or?
Yes and no. I mean, they have all the standard things that everyone else would have, but actually with the post certifications now, the police officer standards and training, the legislation that passed a couple of years ago, they're required to attend a 40-hour school resource officer course to be certified in that. I believe our first officer had already attended that course, but that's something we'll do over the summertime with the person who just got selected for the fall position. So that's mandatory. They have to finish that before they can go into the schools. And I guess to kind of reinforce what I'm talking about, when the school administration interviewed the officers and chose the person they wanted in the school. So I think that collaboration that we have with them works really well. We have an excellent relationship with all the schools. So we thought that was important that they select, the officer that they want in their building, working with every day. So that worked out really well.
Great. So then I think my last question about these categories are that these officers are being replaced. If they're moving over, someone else is filling in, or they're new officers. So our net number of officers is going up to reflect the 7 and then the 4 that are coming on, correct?
Yes. So we had retirements. Essentially, that's really what it was all. It was injured on duty, so people are injured. Or is that you're asking about the new hires?
Well, I guess I'm just wondering, with 1 going to school resource, 2 in the traffic, 10 in family services, thinking about overtime, I just want to make sure that people aren't being pulled from one area and put into another, and there's no net increase.
No. Honestly, because of the low level of staff we had over the last, let's say, 2 years almost, adding 11 bodies was pretty significant. So we have what we call spare officers on each shift now. So when somebody's off, the spare officer basically is already there, so we don't have to backfill for overtime.
Right.
And it also allowed us to, I guess you think of it as like what you're saying, shifting. So when these new officers, there's 4 of them over the summer, actually get operational in their off-field training and they're all alone, that's when we're going to move the school resource officer out of control, because one of those new officers is going to plug into that spot.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's how we're doing that. We're waiting until these people are trained and ready, so we're not backfilling while they're training.
Okay, excellent. One last question is about the police overtime for this year. Is there an additional amount of overtime for this year that we're not seeing in our current?
I think I know you have the total, right?
If I understand your question correctly, are you wondering if there's more money being added to the budget for the current year, fiscal 23,
yes,
to cover overtime expense?
Yes.
It's my understanding, speaking with Director Spellman, that ARPA funds will be used to cover our additional overtime above and beyond our original budget. I think that's going to be discussed at a later time as a part of the supplement.
It is, but the only reason I'm asking for it now is because we look at current year as a predictor of future years, and I feel like there's perhaps a similar tendency as to what we just heard about with the fire department, that there's some pressure to make the numbers work, and then there's always another ask at a certain point toward the end of the fiscal year. And I know that, Chief, you talked about last year during budgeting how you really wanted to get the numbers close to what they were, or closer to what they might actually be. And there's still a kind of a significant need. Again, not debating the need for it, really just looking at how we plan for it and project for it. So I would wonder how next year's numbers factor into this year's actuals, or vice versa, how this year's actuals factor into next year's ask.
This year's actuals, my forecast, the FDH payroll, probably in the 1.6 to 1.7 million range. That is atypical for us, just because of the amount of open spots that we had due to injuries and retirements over the past 2 years. Now that we have hired those 11 new officers and we're able to properly staff our patrol shifts, the numbers should fall more in line with industry standards. Is my
what would an industry standard be? How would that change this 1.7 million?
So historically, for a long time, the benchmark in the police industry or law enforcement industry was approximately 10% of a total budget. More recently, in the past 5 or so years, a couple of police think tanks and academia, actually to name a few, Columbia University and Cornell University, have been using more of a 15% of personnel costs, which in this current year would be closer to $1.6 million. And I think the reason for that increase in the industry standard is just the expanded services and expanded expectations of police in 2023 versus 2010, 2000, et cetera. So the range would probably be 1.2 to 1.7 million, depending on whether you chose the 10% of total budget or the 15% of personnel costs as the standard you were going with.
So then that means that the 1.7 for this year is in line with industry standards?
Many police departments, that is in line with how their actual expenses come in.
Okay. And then in terms of the ARPA funds, so that's money, that's actually free cash money that's coming, right? Because that's where the ARPA money is. Or is it a different ARPA fund?
These would be county ARPA funds that we've applied for, the specifics for the police department. The process will be that we'll be moving the expenditures over to the federal county ARPA fund, and that will free up funds within the school budget to cover the additional overtime costs. For
You mean the police budget?
Police, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay.
The police budget, yes.
Okay, thank you. I think that's everything. All right. Thanks.
Madam President.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Chief, for being here tonight with your team. I just have a couple of follow-ups. So of the new 11 hires, 1 school resource, 2 traffic enforcement, and did you say 2 new canine officers?
Those are like just, they stay in patrol. They just get assigned the canine.
Okay.
So we have 1 currently going through drug detection school, but once they're done, they just go right back into patrol. They just have the canine.
They have canines, okay.
And then we anticipate a patrol dog sometime in the fall to go to school, and then they just go right back into patrol.
And then that would give us the 2 dogs that we've lost in the last couple of years?
That's replacing the 2, right.
Okay.
And then we have Officer Zamboni that has a patrol dog currently.
Okay, thank you. And the school resource officer, that's really good information. I read in the Globe that they had 350 hours of training for school resource. Is that inaccurate potentially?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
It seemed a lot.
That's far more than I know of.
Okay.
There's a 40-hour course that certifies them that the training council puts on. It's a statewide course. That's the only one I'm aware. That's a mandatory one. Maybe there's up to that additional training if they want it. That seems pretty excessive, though. A full police academy is 800 hours.
Okay. No, thank you. I'll look again at that, but I wanted to just make sure that I understood the extra training, and I want to just take this opportunity to, first of all, thank the Family Services, all of your officers, but in particular, I think that underappreciated, because I think it's not as well known as maybe it could be in town, is the work of our Family Services Department. I know when I have a resident who needs a wellness check or is maybe in crisis, I always send them to the Family Services because you guys are well suited to handle those, and it is a huge benefit. And I'll also say that I'm fully supportive of hiring additional officers for an extremely stressful job that requires basically excellent judgment at all times. You have to have officers who are well rested, and that is not to be overlooked. So I'm really happy to hear we're getting 11 more people. Looking forward to having the four new ready to roll, literally. And thank you and to your team for all the work you do in town.
Thank you.
That's all I have, Counselor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Okay. So, Chief, there's a lot of questions that got answered for me. All right, and I just also want to point out Your write-up, and specifically Appendix 1, I found to be very helpful. It anticipated a lot of the questions that I had, and you're able to put this together. I don't know if Mary and
I can't take any credit for that, I'll be honest. The team here put it together, and they're extremely knowledgeable about this area, for sure.
Well, they did a great job on that, and, so some of the questions I had is, why are we seeing an increase in holidays and various other things? Well, it makes sense when you talk about the number of personnel that you have, okay, the folks. You're seeing an increase in the total number of the force. Naturally, you're going to have more people, more holidays to cover. The overtime questions, I know just recently, the previous department, we asked a lot of tough questions. The dynamics are a little bit of the different. I mean, although the numbers seem to be kind of the same, we understand that the impact that injuries play on a force. Absolutely. Whether it be, the police force, the fire department, even other areas of DPW essential services that have to be provided. When people get hurt, get taken out of the rotation, it really throws a monkey wrench into the works. One of the things that I was particularly impressed with was you have an extra officer on a shift, on a patrol. And that as a means to be able to, you have a built-in buffer, a built-in minimum manning, if you will, for what you need on that particular shift. And that covers your vacation coverages, your personal days, your sick days, things of that nature. So I just want to say a lot of kudos on that one. Overall, I mean, there are systemic issues that have to be faced, that you're making progress in this area. I mean, it's interesting to read between the fire and police forces some of the studies that have gone on that say, let's take a look at the analysis of what you can expect to see from a cost perspective on overtime. 10%, I think was one number Sergeant Chambers, you mentioned 10% of the operating budget. Or maybe that was the chief. I apologize if it was. And then there was another number which was after revisions of new thoughts on this area, 15% of not the overall budget, but what was this?
Personnel
Personnel
cost.
Okay. So it's kind of taken it's a different take on how. And the numbers, I'm sure, statistically, they're proving out. I mean, if these theories are coming around. Are there other types of mitigation steps that you see, Chief, that you would be implementing in the next year or two? And what are some of the factors, perhaps, that would be in your work in the favor of your managing that overtime?
Well, I will say it's not lost on us the significance of the overtime. It's honestly probably at minimum a weekly discussion, but it sometimes seems daily with staffing levels. So I would say a big majority of our overtime is patrol, uniform patrol, backfill, and just their time off to ensure that we have the minimum staff that are safely patrolling the town, and they're not, we're not below to a point where there's a safety concern for the officers out there if something happens. There's a lot of stuff that's beyond our control that just naturally occurs. For instance, training. So the mandatory training seems to have just been, because of posts, just seems to have doubled over the last few years. And then the additional stuff that's optional for us, but we feel very important and necessary, ends up costing money for training because they get pulled off their shift to attend a course. For instance, the school resource officer over the summer, he's going to have to go to a 40-hour course. So if we don't have, if the timing of that course, it doesn't coincide with when the officers get off of field training, we're probably going to have to backfill because we only have one shot at that one because they typically only run it once or twice in the summertime. So situations like that occur pretty regularly. And then, as you have, like the fire department said, maybe an older workforce, we're probably distributed fairly evenly, I would say. We don't have a significant number in any age range or anything. You know, when we hire 11, so 25 years from now, all these 11 officers are going to have the maximum of everything.
Right.
So that factors in too, with maybe a maximum amount of vacation time, if somebody's injured. So there's some factors in there that we can anticipate and we understand. We know for a fact we're going to have to replace so many hours so many days of vacation time and whatnot.
Right.
So the sweet spot for us, I think, and what we talk about is where we get to a level of staffing that we can absorb people being removed from the staffing and not have to fill in overtime. I want to say 2 years ago, before the June incident, when we were really at our peak for that, we had 4 officers extra on every shift, on the evening in the not the day shift, but the other shifts. So we have a maximum amount of 4 people can be off on a shift at one time. So we had an automatic, like we were even, unless something happened where, you know, it was maybe a last minute sick person or something. So that's when we saw the best overtime budget for us. And then we had a June incident, and it all went down the drain pretty quick. Then we had about 10 people out almost immediately.
Okay.
So for us, there was a question from one of the counselors about if we added 1 person or 2 or 3 or up to 5, what type of savings would we see? And Sergeant Chambers and Mary are working on that right now. We haven't got it. We'll hopefully in the next couple of days, because it is estimates and it is kind of a guessing game. But there certainly is savings with every body that we add beyond what it costs us to put them on the force itself. Right. So, after you get their base pay and all the benefits and everything, say, I'm just guessing, say it's $100,000. So how much savings are we going to receive from that above $100,000 for plugging that person in? It is definitely, like I said, a point where that's very beneficial, and we would reap rewards from that versus costing us more money because we added bodies. I don't know what that number is. We're trying to figure that out. If it is 5, if we added 5 people to, the day shift and the evening shift combined, we would maybe never fill overtime in patrol. So there's communities that, and I was talking about this today with the deputies. I know of a city that they don't have patrol overtime. They just go down to a certain amount, and it almost never gets to that point. And then, so if you could have half their shift off, but they have so many people assigned that they don't need to. So they basically eliminate, say, patrol overtime.
They have a bench depth. They have the city in particular.
In a city, yeah. I mean, it's a different scenario, but there is a point that I think we're not there with the right amount of staffing to see the lowest amount of overtime that we could, typically expect and be reasonable and say this is consistent every year. This is what we'll see.
Let me ask you this question. So, you had made a comment earlier, and I agreed with it, that there were more requirements being placed on policing than what traditionally a police officer or a police force was expected to deliver in terms of services. Yeah. We have seen in this country and in the state that police officers are asked to do a lot more than let's just say your granddad did as a police officer, right? Do you see that having an impact in any meaningful way on your overtime, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And the best example is our family services unit, because we'll have 3, 4, 5 people in that unit that would have been in patrol 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But they're carved out now. They're doing a very specific job that we desperately need them to do. But those are bodies that, if you look at the numbers historically here, say, in 1975 they had 80 officers or whatever the number is. Those 80 were probably all in patrol other than a select few in detectives. And now we have about, how many are in patrol? 40.
148.
So we'll have 48 uniformed patrol officers actually out there on 7 days a week, throughout the 3 shifts. But we have 89 officers, so including me, the deputies, they're dispersed in all different areas that are required that we need them to do jobs in. So the job ask for us is much different than it was when I first began 30 years ago.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You really made that a clearer understanding on how that impact of expectations on our police force in general and from what our communities are asking for. So yeah, that's a very easy correlation for us to be able to see. So thank you on that. Parking enforcement, I'm assuming parking enforcement, is that rolled into your traffic, or is it two separate?
We had to remove that item. I believe it's like $20,000, $22,000.
Right, you had removed it. There wasn't anything in it.
We restored it. We had a pretty creative way to fund that position part-time throughout this past year with the Commission on Disabilities funding it, and it was we were working with them. So we restored it so that we can just have him the 20 hours a week. 19 hours a week that he's there full time.
Are you seeing any marked results on that in terms of let's just say, I know my experiences from the past are that particularly small businesses in our squares looking for enforcement due to the fact that they're taking up the spots that maybe someone who needs to pop into the hardware store or pop into to pick up some food somewhere perhaps and then get on their way.
Right.
That seemed to be a big issue where you would have employees of a lot of these smaller businesses parking all day. And that was really one of the great benefits of having this even part-time police officer who would make his or her own presence known and start to send a message, similar in the fashion in which I'm sure traffic enforcement will. That's the impact traffic enforcement. Your presence alone will already make a difference.
Agreed.
Right? So are you seeing anything marked differences at this particular point from the time that there was a vacancy in that role until now you're actually rolling people, are actually performing the role again?
It was intermittent all last year until we came up with this creative solution for funding it. So he didn't do it for a while, and then he came back, and we keep statistics on all the citations he writes and what they're for in the locations. So he's actually very busy. It's 19 hours a week, so we allow him to pick and choose throughout the week so that it's just varied, so it's not just the set hours.
That's great.
So we can hit the different times of day and different locations. I mean, we could certainly use a full-time person doing that, probably 2 or 3, to be honest with you, but he's very effective, and he's very busy. And we do funnel any and all complaints for parking through him and through Deputy Cahoon, who responds to all that stuff. So I would say if people do have complaints, just certainly let me know or Deputy Cahoon, and we'll get on it. But yeah, he's been very effective as far as I can tell.
Well, that sounds great because I have not heard anything. North Braintree Square is in my district, and I haven't been hearing anything. So that's a good thing.
Good news.
Yeah, that is good news. All right, and so how is it you're envisioning the traffic enforcement? Are you going to do the same thing when you deploy that? Are they going to be a regular shift? Are you going to stagger them?
Yeah, they're going to stagger their hours for the morning commute and the afternoon commute. So they'll all there'll be a couple of days a couple of day shifts, a couple of evening shifts, Monday through Friday, obviously just to deal with the commuter.
Yeah.
There's certainly more than just traffic enforcement for them. There's any and all the complaints that we can have them deal with, and actually even responding to citizens who send in even an email talking about, say, speeding cars or intersection they're concerned about. The personal follow-up means a lot, and they'll be able to dedicate their time to that, and then dealing with the complaint itself. But we're going to kind of let them at their discretion with the amount of complaints they receive. So we have a sergeant who's going to run it, and then he's going to attend the monthly meetings there to deal with the committee that receives all the complaints.
Great. The DPW
task. Yeah, the task.
What do they call it? And Right,
task.
task. Thank
Yeah.
you. It's been a while.
Agreed.
Yeah, right. Well, that's terrific news, and I know I was the squeaky wheel on traffic enforcement, and when I saw that, I had a grin on my face that, like, thank you. And I'm not taking credit for that, Chief. I'm really appreciated the fact that you have found ways to address a number of issues here that the police force is challenged with. So thank you for that, and I look forward to the maturation of that particular unit and its effectiveness.
Yeah, I mean, we hope if, anticipating additional staffing, or adding bodies, that's probably going to be one of the first things we do is add staff to that unit, along with the patrol force, the uniform patrol. So it's a balance, but there's a big need there, and we do receive a reasonable amount of complaints. I mean, that's the number one complaint, really, if you look generally, people have concerns with. So it was a huge void that we were missing that we filled. So I'm looking forward to it also.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that. I'm looking forward to it as well, to see how it works, its benefits in a number of areas for us. Thank you. That is all the questions that I have this evening. I'm going to ask if there are any other questions from members. Okay. Yes, Councilor Maglio.
Yes. The part about the parking enforcement, very important piece that I remembered.
Okay.
During Commission on Disability meetings, it turned out that there are a lot of tickets that are written and fines that are issued, but that very few of them are actually collected. And so I think I would turn to Mr. Spellman to say, what mechanism is there in place in order to see, because if you can get tickets but you don't have to pay them, that is some of they're not really having much of an impact. So is there something that we can do in our systems to make sure that they're collected?
There is a system in place of parking tickets and also motor vehicle excise. Several demands go out. The original ticket's issued, then several demands go out, and then there's a vehicle to send out a final notice to the delinquent excise or parking ticket person. There is a system where the town can go to the registry of motor vehicles and mark that ticket at the registry, and that ticket would need to be paid in order to renew your license and or motor vehicle registration. And we have that in place for our excise and also for the parking tickets, so that system is in place. And
okay, so because a lot of what the commission was looking for were, and that the tickets were being written were about blocking curb cuts, blocking ramps, parking in handicap spots, and so there were thousands in fines, but very few that were actually collected. Is there like some updated number on that to show the amount of tickets that were written and what that revenue might be and how much of that was actually collected?
I can check with the treasurer. I think she can run a report from
I would love to know
our
that.
deputy system as to the parking tickets issued, paid.
Because that's just an important piece of it.
Right, yeah.
Councilor, I guess one of the issues with parking enforcement, the citations, is typically if they don't get paid, it could be years, because either people, for whatever reason, don't realize they have to pay the ticket, or or they chose not to and forgot about it. They put it aside, not intentionally, but until they need to renew their license or their registration, they're not even going to be aware of it. So it could easily be 2 years before they come in to rectify that. So that's why there's oftentimes a delay in the tickets being paid. That's a common problem, I think, throughout in my experience in other departments also. And we use that company Kelly and Ryan as a facilitator for that. I don't know exactly how they operate with that, but when we have issues, we contact them, and they kind of can locate the the citation in their system also.
So people would get a ticket, get some sort of a citation, and then get a letter that their fines have increased, and they still ignore them?
Yes.
Okay. So looking at what those numbers, because 2 years has gone by now and that amount of, cycle, so to see that we are sending out those demands, to make sure that people know that their fines are rising, to make sure we take those steps to notify the registry or whatever it is, because I think that's the other piece of traffic enforcement. Some of it's visual, just seeing a police officer. People might stop extra long or extra exaggerated at the stop sign, or there's the visual deterrent that seeing a police officer creates. But then there's actually also the enforcement, because I received mixed messages about that in terms of people coming in and complaining, and many of them getting their tickets forgiven. And so we just want to make sure that you're not doing all this work out there in the streets and then every ticket is being forgiven.
No, there's an appeal process that Lieutenant Ware is the contact within the department.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody gets a parking citation of any type, they can appeal it and they contact us, and he's the so-called hearing officer.
Okay, good.
That's pretty rare. He doesn't do a lot of those.
Mm-hmm.
I would say what the most common parking citation that gets undone, I guess, or dismissed is a person that has a handicap placard that does not post it on their rearview mirror. And the parking enforcement officer, John Cavello, he writes a lot of those, and typically it's fallen off or they have one and forgot to put it up.
Mm-hmm.
So then once they come in with it, they're typically elderly, so we just take the ticket back and dismiss
Sure.
it.
Yeah.
But even those are not, that's probably the most common, but it doesn't happen on a daily basis or whatnot. It's pretty rare, I think. So a vast majority of them should get paid at some point. It's just a matter of when they get paid.
Okay.
And it's completely out of our hands as
Yep.
far as that whole process.
Yeah, okay.
So,
Thank you.
okay.
That's it, Counselor.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, correct.
Good to go. All right. I think that is all that we have this evening. We will now, let's see, we don't need any action on that. We don't take the vote to table, do we? You want a motion to table?
Motion to table, please.
All right, so do we have a motion to table 23025, Mayor, fiscal 2024 operating budget?
Motion to table order 23025 to May 16th, 2023.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do we have?
Adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chief of Staff. We appreciate your time this evening, and also Director Spellman.